Yeah.
Okay, should we go ahead and get started, or should we give it a few more minutes?
I think we could go ahead and get going.
Okay. Right. Turn that on. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Brianna Wegner, and I'm a soil scientist with the USDA NRCS Soil Survey, and we're gonna kind of do a basics soil training today or session. I do have, let's see if this will work for me today. Kind of an outline about what we're going to talk about today. Of course, PowerPoint has to get all up in my face. All right, here we go. So we're going to have a very brief section on how to color and how to texture, since we do have standalone training videos on the YouTube and the Envirothon website. I'm just going to briefly talk about them, and you can, if you need more information or need more of a tutorial, I suggest checking those videos out, as we do go through them quite in depth. We'll touch on HCl and effervescence, and I do have some videos showing the different levels of effervescence to help you guys kind of figure out what things should look like. We'll briefly go through the Hydric indicator field guide, narrowing it down to what you maybe should be focusing on or thinking about while trying to learn that material, or even start approaching that material. We'll go through the EcoSite and CTSG field guides kind of quick, and then hopefully there'll be time at the end to kind of go over some calculations that we might be asking students to do this year, or at least moving forward. So hopefully we'll have time to get to that. So
Before we begin, I'll say if anyone has any questions at any time, you can pop them into the chat box, and I'll be monitoring for any questions that we can give to Brianna.
So we'll go ahead and get started with color. So we use the Munsell color book, and if you know, these are super expensive. So if you don't feel like buying one, or maybe that's not in the budget, you can get just the pages.
Brianna?
Yep.
I'm not able to see your video if you're demonstrating anything right now.
Okay, I am. Am I not? I don't know. Am I on? I'm on, aren't I? Yeah, I'm on. Okay.
I can see it on my end.
Okay, then maybe it's just me.
Yeah, I don't know. Teams is weird like that sometimes. You can just get the pages, and they are somewhat cheaper than the whole book. But a little quick rundown of how we do color. You compare your soil sample to the chips on the page. And then one really important thing about how we ask you to record color is that we're not looking for words. So you can kind of disregard this side of the book. What we're looking for is the hue. So that's going to be the number on the page. Each page is its own hue. And so it starts with whatever number is on the page. And then we go vertical for value. So they start with V, that comes next. And those are these numbers along this side here, and then a slash, and then comes chroma, which are numbers listed along the bottom of the page. And chroma has an H in it for horizontal. So that's how you can kind of remember to tell them apart. But the whole name of, let's say, this chip right here would be 10YR, that's our hue, 3, because that's our value, and then 2, because that's our chroma. So we've got, 3, 2. And so that's a really quick rundown of how we do color. And then for texture, we will have the texture by field guide at the stations that require you to texture. So if nobody is familiar with this, I believe you can find this online somewhere, or there may be a link on the Envirothon website, but it's a flow chart. So you get your sample of soil, add water to it, and then you work through the flow chart. So if it remains in a ball when it's squeezed, you go one way. If it doesn't, it's sand. If it does remain in a ball, but it does not form a ribbon, then it's loamy sand. If it forms a ball and makes a ribbon, then it's a measurement of that ribbon. So if it's 5 centimeters long, it's in this column. If it's between 2.5 to 5 centimeters, it's in this column. And if it's less than that, it's in this column. And you just work your way through it. It's pretty I don't want to say intuitive, but this flow chart really takes a lot of the guesswork out of texturing, especially if you're not super familiar with the technique. It's a good place to start.
Brianna, we have a question in the chat.
All right.
They're wondering, when coloring soil, should the soil be dry or moist?
Okay, so that is a very good question. Professionally, as a soil scientist, we use both dry and moist color. They tell us different things. But for the Envirothon, the majority of the color we will be looking for will be the moist color. So you should maybe in your practice just start wetting it up a little bit, just a few squirts of water. To get that moist color. Otherwise, we won't really ask for the dry color, just because a lot of the times our samples that we're working with, either the moist color and the dry color are going to be the same, or they're already what we would consider moist. I mean, they're not that fresh, but we will have water and stuff, and it'll be very clear in the question that we're looking for the moist color. So more often than not, I would say practice with a moist color.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. That is weird. All right, so we'll move on now to hydrochloric acid and effervescence. So hydrochloric acid here is a weak acid, and we use that to test for calcium carbonate. So this is a qualitative measurement of how much calcium carbonate is in our soil. We do have methods for quantitative or giving us hard numbers of how much calcium carbonate is in our soil. But when we're in the field, we want something quick, we want something easy, so we use hydrochloric acid. And if you are looking to get some of this, I would suggest reaching out to your local soil water conservation district or NRCS field office to see if maybe they might have some for you. Or if you're looking for a recipe to like make it yourself, reach out to your local soil survey office. So there's one in Dickinson, there's one in Bismarck, and there's one in Fargo. And we should be able to help you with finding a recipe, because the ingredients for this are very common. You can find them at most hardware stores. And so it's just a matter of proportions and stuff like that. But it is a weak acid, so you still need to be careful, because even if it takes a couple of years, it will still burn a hole through your clothes. Yeah. So on the topic of calcium carbonate, sometimes people are wondering, well, why do we need to test for that? It is a salt, and because salts might cause issue with plant production, or crop production, plant performance and growth and things like that, we like to kind of test for those sorts of things. And HCl, or hydrochloric acid, is one of the ways that we test for that. So now there are, or I guess, so there's, what is there, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there's 5 different levels of effervescence. And we'll watch some videos. So this video that I'll get pulled up here will be a non-effervescent example, and we'll work our way up the scale and kind of maybe talk about things as we go. So I'll give it a moment. Are you guys able to see a clump of soil in a pan?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Hit play. So as you can see, nothing's really happening. We don't have any bubbles. We don't have any fizzing. No, it's just the soil is now just wet. Okay. So now our next the next video that we will watch is going to be a very slight example. One caveat with this is that it's something that's very, I guess you could say, subjective. So it varies from person to person. So what I might think is slight effervescence, my colleague might think is either very slight or strong, right? Either side of the spectrum. But there's typically, different things or levels that a person could use to say, yeah, I think this is slight versus strong. There's more of a break there. Rarely at Envirothon, we will have an example that's very slight, just because it's difficult to see or hear or to discern that that's what it is. And so we try to avoid giving you examples that are very slight, just because it is kind of difficult sometimes. So this next example is labeled very slight, but it could also be argued that it has slight effervescence. So this is what that looks like. And so we can kind of see some bubbles. It's not really foaming, but there's some things happening where we've got some bubbles occurring, and so that would be slight. It's not frothing, it's not foaming, but we do have some bubbles. Okay, and so that was slight to very slight. So now this next one will be what I would consider to be strong effervescence. It's a little bit more bubbles than slight. We don't have foam yet, or what I would consider to be a foam. But here we go. So we get some white foam there. You can kind of hear it snap, crackle, and popping like a bowl of Rice Krispies. So that is strong effervescence. And now this is going to be an example of a sample that could go either way. I would lean more towards violent with this example. But I could also see where some people might think that this is considered strong. So this is one that it could go either way, but if it were me to make the decision, I would call this violent. So you can see that, right away, we have foam, we have bubbles, there's a lot of foam, there's a lot of bubbles, and it happens really quick. So that would be one of those things to distinguish between strong effervescence and violent effervescence is how quickly that reaction takes place. That's always a good indication that you have violent effervescence as opposed to strong effervescence. And we do have one more example that is a good example of a violent effervescence, but unlike our last example that we just had, the foam does not stick around. I mean, it's quick. So we'll take a look at that one. So there you go. So in that video, the reaction happened really quick. We still had lots of bubble, lots of foam, but it didn't really stick around, right? It sort of reacted and then was done. And so that's just a little bit of an idea of things maybe that you could use to help figure out if something is strong or violent or strong or slight. Sometimes slight, it's very difficult to tell. That's when you use very slight. And in that case, maybe a lot of older soil scientists that I've worked with they'll hold the sample up to their ear to hear it, because this reaction will sound a lot like a bowl of Rice Krispies. So it when you pour the milk in the bowl of Rice Krispies and you get the crackling, that's what this reaction between hydrochloric acid and calcium carbonate will sound like. So are there any other questions regarding effervescence or hydrochloric acid? No? Okay. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the field indicators of hydric soils. So this is quite a big, I don't want to say book. It is a book, but there's a lot of information here, certainly for people to go through and dig through. But for students living and working in the state of North Dakota, I would say that there's only 3 hydric indicators that you really need to worry about or focus on. And we have this little cheat sheet that we will probably provide at the stations talking about hydric soils, but we're really only worried about A11, A12, A12, and F6. And this sheet that we're looking at right now kind of walks you through some questions to help you figure out which indicator that it is. So in order for a soil to meet A11, it has to meet all 3 of these criteria. So do you have a depleted matrix within 12 inches of the soil surface? The answer is yes. Okay, if the depleted matrix has a value in chroma of 4.1, 4.2, or 5.2, or are these horizons, or if it has this effervescence and it has this much redox, then yes. So it'll walk you through the different criteria. And
Brianna,
yeah.
I have a question for you. Can you explain what exactly a depleted matrix is and why it's important that we look for it?
Yes, yeah, I can talk about that. So the depleted matrix is our way of knowing that there has been water sort of stagnating for a while or hanging out in that horizon. And the way that we can tell if something is depleted is through color. So that's another way that the color of the soil is important and why knowing how to color soil is a valuable skill. And typically a depleted matrix will have a value of 4 or greater and 2 or 2.5 or less. So really, if your colors are in these 2 columns on any page, really, that would be considered a depleted matrix. Now, there are a few caveats with that. So if you have a darker color, like 4.1, 4.2, or even 5.2, because these are common colors for E horizons or horizons that maybe are not necessarily gray due to moisture, but are gray due to either parent material or some other kind of soil process, you need to have 2% or more distinct or prominent redox concentrations. So those are going to be those rust spots that they're going to have a color that's going to be red or a brighter brown. So in order for that depleted or for that horizon to kind of classify as a depleted matrix, you need to have something else present. However, from 5.1 to These other ones here, all you need to do is have that color in that horizon for it to be considered depleted. What else has this talked about? Color, we've got redox, the value, the chroma, and some other things that help us obviously is a dark surface, a thick dark surface. So when they mean dark surface, we're looking at these two chips here in the corner of the color page. So something with a value of 2 and a chroma of 1, or a value of 2 and a chroma of 2. Those are going to be our dark colors. And those dark colors are derived from organic material. So typically in our hydric soils, because we have a lot of water, we also get varying kinds of different vegetation. And especially since agriculture is a really big part of North Dakota, their economy, these wetter soils don't get plowed up and farmed as often as soils that are non-hydric. And so there's a lot more time for all that organic matter to kind of build up and decay and turn into soil, which gives it that darker color. So if we have a thick, dark surface, we know that we've had a lot of organic matter sitting there for quite a while, giving it that dark color. And then also there's, things going on below it, giving it that indication that the soil has been wet. So like here's kind of a picture, kind of showing you. So this is maybe a dark soil that looks, oh yeah, maybe it was just grass that got wet, but then it's quite dry underneath it. And there are some other examples, I think, pictures that we'll get to maybe in a minute, but I also want to touch on the front part of this book has a lot of information contained in it, and we will ask you questions from this part of the book, but we will always refer you to a page number. But it's just interesting things about soil microbes and how they reduce iron and manganese because they're in an area or an environment with no oxygen, as one way to kind of figure out if something might be hydric or not. So you can kind of read that. A really big one is that if there is a rotten egg odor in the soil, it's because we've got some sulfur, we've got some sulfate reduction happening. And so that's always a really great indicator that something might be hydric, is if you've got this sulfur smell happening. Because I don't want to say it's because the organic matter's rotting. That's just a small part of it. But something is rotting more or less to give off that sulfur smell. And then we talk about organic matter accumulation, and other things like that. So
I have a question
Brian.
again.
Yes.
If students would be interested in kind of studying this document ahead of the state competition, is it readily available, or can they order it from anywhere, or what would you suggest?
I would suggest, I believe you can find it online through a quick Google search. There is a thing now, the NRCS updated a few of their websites, and so some of the links that once worked no longer work. But there is a PDF version available online. I'm unsure at this time if you're able to order a hard copy booklet from the NRCS distribution center, but I know that the PDF version is available online. It just is a matter of navigating to where that is accessible. And I think there might be a link on the Envirothon resources page or in that document. However, with the new website update, the link may or may not work. But if you just type field indicators of hydric soils in the United States in your search engine of choice, it should pop up. And we're currently on version 8.2. So I believe that's the version I have and have been working with. So yeah.
And for those of you that are tuning in live, I just link that file in the chat box.
Yeah. Okay. Currently, but one of the things is that this guide has some really great pictures. So here, this is for A7 mucky mineral, but I think it will also kind of demonstrate the point for A6 as well. Or sorry, not A6. Yeah, we'll scroll on to A11. So A9, indicator 11. So over here, the picture on the right is an example of what indicator A11 will look like. So depleted below a dark surface. So we've got this layer of leaf litter, it looks like, but it's also quite dark. But it's not more than 12 inches. So within 12 inches of the surface, we have a depleted matrix. You can see that the majority of the color of the soil is a very bright gray color, which is an indication that it's depleted. The science behind that is all the iron has been depleted, and that's why it's gray. Whereas in the areas where we've got these red splotches, these are our redox or redoxamorphic concentrations. And that's areas where the iron has been reduced.
Oxidized.
I believe oxidized. Yep, I got them flip-flopped. And has rusted, right? It turned red. Yep. And so that's what that's gonna look like. And then I think that there is a picture for, yeah, on the next page. Here's another example for A11 depleted below a dark surface. There we have more of a dark surface, and we just have a different color of soil that we're working with. So the redox looks a little different, and our depleted matrix looks a little bit different. A12, which is thick, dark surface, has a surface horizon that's more than 12 inches. So if you've got deep, dark material, you know, with 12 inches or more, then your soil's going to meet the indicator for thick, dark surface. There's that. And then find F6, which is redox dark surface, is going to be where you're finding those rust spots up in this dark surface horizon. And that is a really tricky one because the soil is already so dark, it's really difficult to see those redox concentrations. It's really hard to see those rust spots. So that one might be difficult to find or to assign to a soil, just because it is so difficult to see. And I don't have a picture of that right off. Oh, right there. Okay. See what? I'll just F6. 1, 2. So here on the left-hand side, this would be an example of redox dark surface. You can see we have that dark surface horizon, but we've also got some red spots. We've got some gray spots. So things are oxidizing and reducing. Another indication that we've had a lot of water just hanging out in this zone of the soil. And so that is a quick rundown of the field indicators of hydric soils. Again, we will have this document for you to use at each station. So it's not like you have to memorize everything, but if there were any areas I would suggest you focus on, it would be indicator A11, indicator A12, and indicator F6. And depending on the question, we may or may not have this little cheat sheet available as well. But it's more so that you get used to looking at this document to answer some questions. All right. So done that. Next up is the EcoSite and CTSG field guides. So we have had these for quite a few years now. You can get these. You should be able to find these online. It might be a little bit more tricky to get to them. Again, like I said before, the NRCS updated some websites and links don't work anymore. But I was able to find them by just typing the title into Google. And I did find older versions of them, which, while we probably will be using the most up-to-date version, the process for using it is still the same. So even if you don't have version 1.3, you still have version 1.2, or you have, version 2.2 of whatever book. The process to use them is still the same, so you can still use them to practice. It's just some of the wording might be different, but I guess what one thing you should be aware of is that we're not out to trick you, so you will have everything you need to answer the questions we ask of you. So if we're using a different version, it's because you're gonna have what you need to answer the question. So I guess for practicing purposes, the version doesn't really matter all that much, but if we use a different version for the test, it's not that big of a deal, because it's how you use it is the same. And that's all we really want you to learn and work on, is how to use this book. So typically we will give you an example soil with a little bit of a narrative. So let's see, this is CTSG. So something like, you have a soil sample and it feels very gritty. It's, ribbon is 1 inch long and it's well drained, moderately deep to bedrock. and there's no clay pan, we'll give you a description. And so what you do first, we'll prompt you to start. In this book, it's on page 4. There's a chart. And this is a CTSG, or Conservation Tree and Shrub Group book. And in one column, there is soil descriptions. And so what you should do is compare what's in this column to the narrative that we give you. And as soon as you find something that matches, then stop. Right? So here, our soil from our example is well drained. Well, our first example says that it's poorly drained or wetter. Okay, well, it's not that group. And then the next group says soils that are somewhat poorly drained. Well, we can roll that group out then too. And then you can kind of go. The next one's talking about depth. And so from our example, we've got moderately deep to bedrock. Okay, so is that one of the things in this box? And it is. So we can say, okay, so our soil is in set 3. And then it'll tell you what page to turn to for more information, right? So for set 3, we're on pages 10, 11, and 12. And so then you turn to pages 10, 11, and 12. And then there's more criteria, right, for each different group that we have, or, site criteria. And then that's where you read through each of these, and as soon as you find something that matches the description and the narrative we give you, you should stop, and that's what it is. So here we've got, let's see, surface layer forms a 1 to 2 inch ribbon, and in our example, our soil forms less than an inch ribbon. Okay, so it's not that first one. And then the second one forms a 2 inch or longer. Well, nope, we can roll that one out because our soil it's less than an inch. And so we can kind of rule out all the soils that form a 2 inch or longer ribbon. And then we can start focusing on the ones that are less than 2 inch and work through it that way. Okay, and so that is how you arrive at the CTSG, CTSG assignment for different soils that we might give you. And there's also other things in this book that we might ask you, kind of on page 5 or thereabouts. There's an explanation for what all these letters mean. We sometimes will ask you questions about that. But there's also a texture by feel guide in the back of it. So if you were unable to get a copy of that other one I showed earlier, if you're able to, find this document and print it off, you've got yourself a texture by field guide in the back. So that's pretty handy. And there's also a glossary, but that's only for if you're confused by a term. We usually don't pull questions from the glossary. So that's the Conservation Tree and Shrub Group book.
Now, I will say, before we go on to the next one, I put this in the chat too, but the page numbers can be kind of confusing as just a full PDF. So you want to make sure to best use it, you print it off. And so it becomes like a little folded in half booklet. And then that way it's more easy to understand.
Yes, that was something. These are set up to be printed and folded into a book so you can take them with you. And so to have them as a PDF can be kind of confusing for people. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you're thinking, oh, I'll just carry the PDF around with me. It might be really hard to read and understand. So for the ecological site guide, follows the same principles and ideas as our CTSG guide, where you you have a table of contents. This one has a nice little example diagram in the front. This version of it anyway. And then you've got this table with criteria in one column and a group in the other. And so this is one area where typically people are going to get confused and messed up. So with eco sites, you have an ecological group and you have an ecological site. So if you want to think of it as the group is like a team of people and the site is like the individuals that make up the team. And so if we have, a soil, we'll give you a narrative. And well, is it in a forested area? No. Okay, we can move on to the next one. Is it somewhat poorly drained to very poorly drained? And if, our example says, yeah, you've got a poorly drained soil, we can stop there and be like, okay, our ecological group is group 2, high water table ecological group. Right? And then it says, go to page 12 or whatever. Yeah, page 12. And so then you turn to page 12 in the book. And you've got a little bit more criteria about soils that should belong in this group. And then on the other page, sometimes 2 pages. But in this case, we've got another group and another page. But sometimes there's a lot of sites in a group. So, you might have to turn a page. But then you just compare your narrative to each of these different sites to get us the ecological site. So just like we did with the CTSG booklet, this book set up very similarly. Okay, we've got, our soil was poorly drained, but does it occur in depressions? Well, yes, but maybe ours doesn't form a 2-inch ribbon. Okay, so that one's out. Things like that. So the way to become a master at using these is to read and pay attention to the information in the book compared to the information we give you, and use that to make your decisions. Because if you're able to read what we give you and read it in the book, you should hopefully come to the right answer. We try to make it, I don't want to say super obvious, but easy enough that when you're reading through it, you should be able to figure out what group you need to be in, so what page you need to turn to, and then what site, ecological site or CTSG group we are looking for. So are there any other comments, questions, concerns about EcoSite or CTSG guides?
I guess one general question we could address is what these documents help with. I know with the conservation tree and shrub groups, they help us determine which trees and shrubs can grow on which type of soils. Do you want to talk more about what ecological site descriptions mean?
Sure. So I think back a while ago, ecological site descriptions were kind of, at least in North Dakota, they were very similar to like a range. Oh shoot, what did they call it? It's basically a way for ecologists and soil scientists to kind of meet in the middle and say, on this particular kind of soil, we're going to have this kind of plant community. That is a lot of what ecological sites and identifying them mean. And so that could lead to people being able to make maybe better land management decisions by saying, oh, this is a wet meadow. Maybe, I shouldn't build my house here or whatever, right? Because, when people hear the word wet meadow, they think like a swamp or somewhere that's wet, right? And it kind of, steer them in another direction, I guess. But ecological sites are just a way that another way that soil science can become interdisciplinary, right? So we've got ecology. So we're meeting in the middle with ecologists who are saying, hey, we noticed that we've got a very similar plant community over here that we do over there. And the soil scientist is like, well, of course you do, because the soils are the same. And so it's a marriage between what's above ground with what's below ground, and can be kind of a quick and easy way, if you're walking about and notice plants community changing, based off this, you can say, hey, I think our ecosite changed, which means our soils are different. So that's kind of one way that it can help other scientists to make other decisions or study other things. And we're, as the soil survey is working pretty diligently to try and get these ecological sites established and set up and used. So it's a bridge, I guess.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
Are there any more questions at this point? Doesn't look like it.
Okay. We can move on to kind of the last thing I wanted to touch on, which is a new calculation that we could be asking students to do, and that is calculating the weighted average of clay. And we'll get into why this might be important in a little bit, but I'm just kind of going to walk you guys through how this gets calculated. And if we do ask questions about it, we won't have students fill out, like this whole table. It might just be, calculate this value or calculate this value or something to calculate ultimately the weighted average clay to then answer a question. So what we do to figure out weighted average clay is we take our thickness of our horizon. So we've got our top depth, our bottom depth, our thickness is the difference between the two. And then we times that by our clay percentage here, which is a value that is field measured. We've wrote it down on our data sheet. And then we need to get the weight of the clay. So then to get that number, we take our percent clay and times it by our thickness. And we don't necessarily use this like as a percent, so it's not times 0.28, it's times 28 to get our answer of 240. And we do that for each horizon that we have. Oops. I'm getting a little carried away. Have for as many horizons as we have. And so as a soil scientist, we typically will only do this for something called the particle control size section. In most soils, it's from 25 centimeters to 100 centimeters. But if we have an argillic horizon, then it's for just the argillic horizon. But for the sake of just learning and having students get used to calculate it, they won't have to worry about any of that. We'll give them the numbers they need. So once we have our weight for each horizon, we'll take the sum of that. And that's what that is. And that sum then gets divided by our total thickness of all of our horizons in question, right? So this number gets divided by this number to give us this number, our weighted average clay. So it's pretty simple. You know, it's averages. I know the weighted average can kind of throw people for a loop. But again, we will try to make it very clear what is being asked of you. And so why might this be an important thing to know? We oftentimes use it to figure out the family class of our soil. So this is what family does it fit into? So we all have a family. We all belong to a family. Soils also have a family, belong to a family. So this is a textural triangle, but it's a little different than maybe the one you're used to. And that's because it just has the families on it. And so using, you know, our example here, okay, we had 35% was our weighted average clay. So going back to our triangle, we find our clay here and we're at, you know, 35%. Oh, it's kind of on that line. Maybe this is a bad example, but it's on the line between being either clayey or fine family and fine loamy family, right? And so because it's 35.5, you could probably round up to 36, which pushes it just over the line into fine family or clayey family. And this is mostly a taxonomy thing. So how we categorize and name and label soils. It's not really anything that has a lot to do with interpretations, even though if you do have a fine soil or a soil in a fine family, it's an indication to you that there might be a lot of clay there, and that might lead to some interpretive issues. Whereas, you know, fine loamy or coarse loamy family, you won't have those same issues. But it's just another thing, another tool that we can use to help us make decisions about the soil and the land that we live on. So are there any, oh, I guess here is the like scientific equation for weighted average. So it's the sum of the percent clay times the thickness of the horizon divided by the total thickness of your horizons to get you your weighted average clay. Right. Are there any questions regarding that or regarding anything we covered or maybe something we didn't cover?
If not, we could go in. Oh, just need some time to digest the info. Yes.
Yeah, it's a lot of information. Quick. Slammed into a little package.
I'd say the one thing I like about the soils trail that's unique from the others, it's very hands-on and very interpretive. But I guess the con side of that is, where do you find these opportunities to practice them, like texturing and using hydrochloric acid? So what would you recommend for teams to do to practice those type of skills, Brianna?
Well, I guess one option is if you are and it might be real difficult this time of year, but maybe for like advisors to like plan ahead or whatever. I know sometimes if you reach out to your local soil survey office, they may or may not have random soils with known textures just laying around that they might let you borrow. Or you could just get soil from either your backyard or, you know, a producer who's willing to help you out their field, or, you know, your soil and water conservation district might be able to help you out with getting samples to practice with. Now, the thing about that is you won't know what the texture should be or what it is. But if you just want to get students or get to the point where you're like, yeah, I know what I need to do and not you know, and what things I need to think about, that might be a really great place to start. And then, you know, maybe once you've got enough students practicing with that particular sample, you can say, well, the majority of people said it was this, so we think it's this. So that might be one way to get samples, because that's one of those hard things, is that it's quite difficult to get known samples from places without, you know, having to pay crazy shipping costs or whatever. Um, so that's what I would suggest, is just talk to your friends and neighbors and see if they'll, you know, if they've got a field you can go out and, you know, collect some soil out of, or a backyard, or you know, some kind of opportunity that way. As far as the hydrochloric acid goes, that's another tough one. Kind of like I said before, the ingredients to like make this at home are readily available. It's just a matter of finding the instructions on how to make it. So what we typically use is a 1 molar or 1 normal solution. So it's like 1 part acid to, you know, 1,000 parts water, or whatever the calculation is. I always get it kind of mixed up, but it's fairly simple. And so again, I would suggest reaching out to a soil water conservation district or a soil survey office or USDA field office to see if maybe they just have some of this either lying around, or if they have the capability to make some for you to just give you, or, you know, give you the recipe, I guess, with the, you might even be able to find it online. I haven't tried to look it up lately, because we haven't had to make some in a while. But those might be options for you to get some acid. And yeah,
Awesome.
color is another one that might be tricky, because that would be the only one where I could see, you know, these books are weirdly expensive, and you can just get the color pages, but I think even those are like weirdly expensive, but still cheaper than buying a whole book.
All right, that's all great info. Do we want to do a quick Kahoot? Anybody? Anybody? You're not very excited. All right, so can you guys see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Okay. We have Ethan. So if you want to join